The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
$14.90 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. I have a special guest on, newcomer to the show, Chris Martenson. Great website, ChrisMaternsonReport. And I've been reading it for years and finally got him on the show. Chris, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, well, welcome. What are you thinking about this Friday after seeing the blast off in gold and silver and more Fed speak about the more things change, the more they stay the same?
Well, Carrie, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's I wish I could tell you that there are really surprising things happening that nobody could have foreseen. For years, if you've been reading me for years, you know that one of the edicts I have is that we were going to get into some sort of credit crisis, and we were going to try and print our way out of it. I've certainly not been disappointed, although I've been surprised in some of the details. If you'd said 5 years ago, Chris, we're going to find ourselves in a position where the federal government's running a 10% deficit to GDP, and the Federal Reserve is going to be expanding its balance sheet by trillions of dollars, and the dollar is more or less going to hold steady through that process, I would have said you're nuts. But that's happened, and that's happened in part because it turns out Europe's even more of a mess than the U.S. is, and Japan's even more of a mess than Europe. And so we chase that story around the globe, and what we're really at the end of here, forgetting for the moment about the other things that I care about, which includes the depletion of resources, most critically oil. Take those off the table for a second. We're just looking at the economy. And what we're living in is the tail end of about a 40-year credit bubble. For 40 years, the entire world has been growing credit or debt faster than the underlying economies have been growing. And the economies, even as much as they have grown, we have to subtract some of that growth out because it wasn't true growth. Here's an example. A homeowner takes out a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, on their house, and they go out and buy things with that money. It looks like GDP growth, it smells like GDP growth, it tastes like, it's reported as GDP growth, but you and I both know that when you borrow to consume, you get that growth in one period, but you have to pay it back in the future. So it's not real growth, and one of my complaints of GDP worldwide is we should not be including the effects of people, countries, individuals, corporations going into debt simply to consume. Investment's a different story. But here we are at the end of this 40-year experiment, started in the 70s, with credit growing faster than the underlying economy or the income. And so this is a very, very predictable place we're in right now. What it means is that for anybody listening, and I'm sure your listeners are in this crowd, needs to understand that we are not going back to normal. We're not going back to how things used to be. This isn't a little hiccup and we start borrowing again tomorrow or next week. We see a little uptick in consumer credit creation or the government finds a way to borrow another trillion. None of that is going to make any difference to the outcome of this story. This story is one fundamentally about a debt supercycle that has come to its conclusion, and it's in the process of deleveraging. And that's a normal process. We're going to try and print our way out of it. Governments are going to try and pretend it doesn't exist. Politicians will try and avoid it for one more election cycle. All of those things will be true. And there's no way to avoid what's about to happen next.
You brought up a great point. Well, you brought up a lot of great points, but GDP, it's a bogus measure of the underlying economy because it does include debt and includes consumer debt. So Bernie Madoff, he contributed $65 billion to GDP when he was going strong, right? But now, all of a sudden, that $65 billion disappeared. And you go into all these entities. MF Global was contributing to GDP until they disappeared. And that's why GDP is such a fraudulent measure. It doesn't really measure wealth or wealth creation of an economy. It measures consumption, which is in our society has become synonymous with wealth, but it really is something totally different, right?
Absolutely. And simple example, during QE2, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet. That means they printed money out of thin air, or created credit out of thin air, and went and bought treasury bonds, which enabled the U.S. government to go another $800 billion into debt. Well, when the U.S. government took that $800 billion in fresh printed money from the Federal Reserve, what did they do with it? Well, they handed it out as Social Security checks, and they bought a little extra military hardware. They did whatever they do with it, but fundamentally it just got consumed. There was very little investment wrapped up in that set of government expenditures. But that counted. Our government ran pretty much 10% deficit last year to GDP. And we should strip that out because the government didn't create that money out of wealth. That was not, taxed out of the productive part of the economy. That was simply printed into existence and spent. And then we measure it and say it's real. It's not real. And it means that we're overstating the health of the economy. It means that when we look at economic growth, we're comparing apples to oranges because true growth from 5 years ago can't be compared to this fake growth that's printed out of thin air. And they're printing and printing and printing and printing. And I know what the game is, and I understand why they're doing it. I actually have compassion for them. They're saying, their fingers crossed, they're going, if we can just keep printing a little longer and the system can hold together, economic growth will take off again. We can all breathe a sigh of relief and pat ourselves on the back, hold some nice dinners for ourselves, and congratulate everyone. What they're missing in this story is that growth is not going to be returning anywhere near in time or at a level necessary to prevent this debt superstructure from collapsing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pipe dream, kicking the can down the road because the consumer is tapped. And, yeah, you give him more credit, so he buys more stuff that isn't even made in the U.S. It's made in wherever, you name it, but mostly China. So the wealth, if there was any wealth, it leaves the country. And there's no, it's a zero-sum game. There's nothing to be gained here. And I guess this is really the super cycle in debt started with the fiat dollar, didn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty coincident with that. And the fiat dollar was really honestly born on August 15th, 1971, with the final abandonment of the gold standard by Nixon. That's where I date it. But of course, we were living under something like a fiat standard for, since 1933. But realistically, we have to look at this and understand that our money system, as sophisticated as it is, as complicated as it is a very new, recent invention. It's not like this is the culmination of 2,000 years of monetary tinkering and we've got the perfect one and it's much better than all the rest. It's an experiment. And this experiment has never really been fully tested on the global stage in a crisis situation, and that's what's about to happen. And what we find is that very predictably, that when you take money systems and you untether them from something that prevents humans from doing what humans want to do and politicians from doing what politicians want to do, you get a runaway money system. And that's exactly what we've had. And coincident with this money system is the idea that we really discovered oil, really started using oil heavily. Oil is the prime lubricant of the whole global economy. And most people think, but we've been using oil for hundreds of years. Well, not true, really. Think about this. If somebody who's listening to this is 22 years old, they've been alive when half of all the oil in history that has been burned has been burned. We've been using oil really aggressively for maybe 5 or 6 decades in an industrial capacity. Even though it was discovered in 1859, it took a while for it to really penetrate fully. And we are coming to the point now where, for whatever sets of reasons, be they geological or geopolitical, we're just having trouble pumping more of the good, easy, cheap oil out of the ground. We're pumping oil, but it's this heavy stuff and it's expensive. And so this is something that, anybody who wants to look historically should just say, tell me a time when oil has been this expensive and we've not gone into a recession. And the answer is we have 0 examples historically. We are at $100 oil in the US. We're at $113 on the world stage, which is the true price of oil. So we're well over $100 a barrel for oil on the world stage. And we're sort of crossing our fingers and hoping that somehow this debt pile won't tip over because central banks are printing a few bucks and tossing them into the kitty. It's just silly thinking. It might happen. I can't predict the future like anyone, but I can tell you the risk of this thing absolutely not working out according to plan or hopes or dreams is extraordinarily high right now. I don't think it's ever been higher.
Yeah, and we have a lot of historic examples of this type of failure, right? We got the French hyperinflation, the German hyperinflation after World War I, and we got so many hyperinflations that have taken place in the past century that nobody can keep track of them. And they're all a combination of excessive debt to GDP, if you want to call it that, or just debt to the federal budget, the government budget, and this loss of confidence and no gold back. It goes back to Roman times, to the Byzantines. There's nothing new about a fiat system collapsing. Why we should think this one's going to be any different has always mystified me. What is so special about what we're doing here that it should defy economic and common sense?
Well, we're not doing anything different. Each period of history always thinks it's somehow more sophisticated than all the prior ones and has that hubris that says, we're different. And historically, so far, that's never been true. But if you want an explanation for it, I think you wander over into the world of behavioral economics. I did a nice interview with this guy, Dan Ariely. He's out of Duke University, researches behavioral economics, and he finds out that humans are predictably irrational. That's how he puts it. And they have all these ways of showing that people just make the same choices over and over again, which are completely irrational. And I use that and widen it up and say it's completely irrational to think that this time we're going to be able to print our way to prosperity. It's never worked before. And so for anybody who wants to hold on to that as an idea, a hope, or promote it as a plan, or God forbid, actually go out and implement it as a set of policies and actions like Bernanke has done, really owes everybody a tremendous explanation that's very detailed about why they hold that view, because it's historically indefensible. So we're going to have to look for something that's really, truly, fundamentally different about how we're doing it this time. And there's nothing different. When you print, whether this was the old days when they used to actually physically have to clip the coin, so they would take each coin in and clip just a little off the edge and take the tailings from those clippings and mint those into new coins, or whether they called all the coins in, reissued them as smaller sizes or lower purities, or whether you ran the printing press like they did in Weimar Germany and just cranked out more paper, or whether you hit the enter key on your laptop and you send ones and zeros into the ether like the Federal Reserve does now. It's immaterial. The action is the same. You're attempting to create real wealth out of no activity, no real definable human activity. That's where wealth comes from. Somebody's got to do some hard work and turn soil into corn or ore into steel, or steel into a car. I mean, somebody's got to perform work for wealth to be created. And the hubris and the oversight of every single generation in history that's made this failure is they somehow believe that they can actually manufacture wealth out of nothing. And it looks like real wealth. It tastes like real wealth for a while. I mean, for a few hours, days, weeks, months, it's real. Federal Reserve puts $1 billion into Citibank's coffers, and Citibank can go buy stuff with that. That's true. The problem is that ultimately that erodes the confidence in the system. And when you're running a fiat-based money system, you are running a confidence-based system. It's everything. And, in my line of work, I encounter more and more people, whether they're on Wall Street or whether they're on Main Street, all across, whether they're financiers or financially illiterate, all have a sinking feeling in their stomach that there's something wrong with our money story. And they're right. Something is wrong.
Yeah, something big time is wrong. And it's funny that you mentioned that they could just, financial alchemy and just create wealth out of thin air and we'll all be happy. And, that would be great if we could just print up money. There was once a Saturday Night Live skit where Jimmy Carter was president, and he said, my economic plan is that I'm going to make every American a millionaire by printing up more money, basically, and it should only be that simple. And I recently did a thing, I don't know if you caught it, in New York State, but our governor just is real proud. He just cut a deal with some Malaysian company for a $4 billion casino hotel entertainment convention center in Queens, of all places, in a residential area where this Aqueduct racetrack is. And at the same time, he's saying, don't drill for natural gas. It's too risky. We can't risk it. So my point was he'd rather have croupiers, because croupiers create wealth, as opposed to natural gas drillers who just screw up the environment. And it's that kind of thinking that permeates and dominates the whole economic establishment in this country, that wealth can be created in a casino, but extracting natural resources, that's a no-no.
Well, you can tell, he's really just echoing what the culture is holding up as a point of view. That our politicians echo what culture is holding up does not surprise me, because that's really their job, if they have one. is that, and so, like at one point in time, Thomas Edison was a hero of the land. That was a scientist. Can you imagine a scientist actually capturing the popular imagination today? Forget about it. Sports figures at one point, the honorable ones, were really revered in a way that they aren't today. And today, who do we revere? It's these hedge fund captains, these people who earn $1 billion in a year, and they're like, wow, that's it. That's the pinnacle of excellence. And what do hedge fund people? They create nothing. Mm-hmm. What they do is they're going out and looking for ways to game the system, find some arbitrage, do some sweet spots. I'm not telling you what they do is sophisticated and it's awesome and it's really a lot of things, but it's not the same as really creating wealth, which is the thing all that money is supposed to be chasing after. Money is no good without wealth, and so let's distinguish those. Wealth is you have something that you really need. That's wealth. You got a home, land, food, warmth, energy. Those are the sources of wealth right there. Money is just a way to get those things. So when you're creating money over here, hand over fist on one side, and you're actually not creating more wealth on the other side, it's only a matter of time before you have an imbalance that results in the true measures of wealth. Corn, wheat, oil, soil, all of that stuff starts to cost more and more and more. And people look at that and go, oh my gosh, the price of those things is rising, and that's not right. What's happening is the value of the money is falling. That stuff is the same value it always had. A bushel of corn is a bushel of corn. I don't care how much you say it costs. And so this is what we're really starting to see, that dynamic is really coming to play. And this is where you and I and everybody listening, we get to live at one of the most interesting periods of human history. And it's this: we have never, as a species, ever faced a global decline in the amount of net energy that we'll have. And we're right at the peak of that at this point in time. Maybe we've got a few more years, maybe a decade, but we're right there, historically speaking. 100 years, people look back and go, it happened then. And this is going to take just incredible, we're going to have to really see the issues for what it is, understand we're in a predicament, and then craft the most elegant responses we can. There are no longer any solutions to this stuff. Solutions meaning we do some things and we get to just keep going in the direction we were going without having to think too hard about it. That's over. We now have to figure out what we're going to do with persistently high and ever rising energy prices. It's going to be part of our landscape pretty much forever if the peak oil story is right. And I think it is. So that means, is that a disaster? Does that mean it's all over? No. There's huge opportunities in this story. There are challenges, yeah. The people who don't see the challenges are going to find themselves in the most disruptive period of their lives. But for the people who can see what's coming, I think that there's just extraordinary opportunities to preserve your wealth, to make your personal living situation as safe as you possibly can. So you've attended to all that stuff on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You've got your shelter, warmth, food, all that stuff taken care of. And then what? Well, then that puts you in a position to take advantage of all the extraordinary opportunities that are coming. And that's my view. And it's, I've organized my investing philosophy around this view of the trends that I see in play. I bought gold and silver very heavily starting in 2002. I'm still very largely in gold and silver at this point in time, but I see opportunities where I'm going to start rotating out of gold and silver into some other areas where I see just extraordinary opportunities, once in a lifetime. And those are going to continue for a while because, even as the old story starts to fall away, and I guarantee you we're going to need less croupiers and we're going to need less of the total service economy going forward, and we're going to need more of the real, the tangible, those sorts of things. Well, we have a real shortfall in a lot of those areas in this country in terms of manufacturing, in terms of skill sets, in terms of infrastructure, all kinds of stuff. There'll be investing going on there. But I think we're going to be doing a whole lot less of the service economy going forward, simply because that all arose as a consequence and in proportion to the amount of cheap energy we had. That's over.
Well, petroleum-based, yeah, but you have to look at the natural gas situation there. I mean, it's down to $2.58, I think, a million per million feet, and that's definitely something. There's going to be a shift to natural gas for transportation once they get trucks to run on it. Take any internal combustion engine and run it off of natural gas. Right now, I think the differential, the BTU differential, is about 8-to-1 or something like that. A BTU of petroleum is about 8 times more expensive than a BTU of natural gas. And what also people aren't aware of is like somewhere around 15% of our gasoline production actually comes from natural gas liquids, and that number has been going up. So yeah, there will be escalating, continuing higher prices in petroleum, so there will be a shift to natural gas, which appears to be quite plentiful, although we don't know the lifespan of those fracked wells, and that technology is still evolving as well. So gold and silver, you think it still makes sense to have a portion of your wealth there, though, right, Chris?
Absolutely. Before I talk about that gold and silver very quickly, I just want to put one asterisk on the amount of natural gas we have, and that is at current rates of consumption. We move almost nothing by compressed natural gas in terms of transportation. As soon as we get 10, 20, 30% of our fleet up onto that, we'll discover that we don't have as much natural gas as we thought. Even though it is relatively plentiful right now, we still don't run anything in terms of transportation on it on a percentage basis. So there's a story there, and there's an opportunity there. Trust me, I see a lot of that, but I'm reserving some judgment about how plentiful that really is until we actually really get our hands into it and start really using it. Then we'll find out how much we do or don't have. Gold and silver, I no longer use that as a single word, like it's one word, gold and silver. There's gold and there's silver. Very different metals to me, although originally I was buying them for the same reason. Silver is an industrial metal. I love it. It's irreplaceable as an element on the periodic table. It's the most reflective. It's the most conductive. It's just special stuff. And it's mainly a byproduct of mining other base metals, although there are a couple pure silver mines out there. It's depleting very rapidly from the Earth's crust in terms of high-quality ore bodies. As energy prices go up, we find mining is more expensive. And so I just am looking at silver as something that when our industrial, we get our economic feet back under us and we go forward into the next business cycle, whether that's in 3 years or 20 years, someday we will. Silver's, I think we're going to discover at that point, is a lot more valuable and scarce than most people really have got their minds around. So the silver I own, I don't have grandkids, but I imagine someday if I do, I will be passing this to them. It's a very long-term investment to me, and just as bullish as can possibly be on it. Love it. Gold is a monetary metal. It's a monetary asset. Doesn't really have any other uses, but boy, is it perfect at that one. And so I believe that there's a bunch of tailwinds to the price of gold right now that are going to continue to propel it forward. That includes a trade deficit and a fiscal deficit in the U.S. That includes the monetary printing that's going on at the central bank levels. It includes the financial instability that's out there, because gold doesn't correlate really well with inflation, but it correlates awesomely with financial instability and uncertainty. I think there's a ton of that coming. And so there'll be, we'll go from, 1,700 to 1,800 to 2,000 to 2,500 to 3,000. Absolutely. I think that's pretty much in the cards. I'm really holding gold, though, for the option value, which is someday, it's possible, not a big chance, but some chance, that gold will be remonetized. That is, the world currency system suffers a fatal crack up. The IMF says, well, we have a special currency everybody can use, and the World Bank says, no, we have one, and the world looks at these cockamamie ideas and says, let's just use what we know works, and we go back to a modified gold standard at some point of some type. If that happens, now we can pick very different numbers for gold, but we're starting to multiply gold by whole numbers, like 8 or 10 or 20. Pick something. I mean, it could go very high. And that's the essence of an excellent option. It's out of the money. The strike price is, going to be extraordinarily high, though, when we get there. Because I could easily see $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 an ounce for gold if it gets remonetized. I'm not predicting that right now, but it's a possibility. So that's how I hold gold, is something that has a bunch of things working for it right now and has this small chance of a very big upside later on. Pick it. I mean, if the euro falls apart and by consequence the dollar falls apart, or more likely, I think the yen gets in trouble first out of all of them for a dark horse sort of a candidate, but it doesn't matter. As you started this program, all the fiat currencies share the same set of features, meaning they've been loaned into existence, they've been compounding with debts behind them faster than the rate of underlying growth, they've been mismanaged, overspent, governments have been unable to rein their spending in. It's an old story, and it's being played out everywhere. So I'm really looking for a pretty major currency crisis somewhere between here and 10 years from now. My personal favorite is somewhere in the next 5 years. shortly after 2013, 14 is somewhere in that zone is when I think that peak oil really gets recognized on the international stage, openly, publicly, above the fold, in the International Herald Tribune, on the New York Times. They go, oh yeah, it's real. That's when the game really fundamentally changes. That's when we shift to a new structural cost for oil. We're at 100 now, but we'll be at some other level, call it 200 or 300. And it's at that point everybody goes, ugh, the debts can't be serviced under that level of oil price. Hey, wait a minute, what are the debts backing up? Well, the truth is, people say the US dollar is not backed by anything. It is backed by something. It's backed by treasury notes. Those are debts. So as the debts start to fall away, it means the currencies get called into question. That's where I think people just throw their hands up and say, what else do we have that looks like money? Gold has never lost its money-like qualities. It is money. It continues to be money. It's recognized all over the world as money. Central banks, despite what they say, hold a lot of it. I love to follow what people do, not what they say. And so I'm just really trusting that at some point gold comes out of the closet and as a quasi-monetary asset and goes fully back into a complete monetary asset. And I have pretty high confidence that's going to happen.
I think it's going to be sooner rather than later. Could go off into the future a bit, but it just seems to me that we're too far down the road. It's inevitable. It's mathematically certain. It just takes one little event till the house of cards comes collapsing down. So, Chris, where do we find you on the internet?
Well, at my website, ChrisMartenson.com. That last name is Martenson, Martenson.com. And or you could just Google Crash Course. The Crash Course is my prime offering. It's a series of 20 video chapters on my website. They're free. Been translated into a bunch of languages. So if anybody there is more comfortable in French or German or Spanish or any even Hebrew now for some reason, we've got it everywhere. It's 20 chapters, and you can just watch them, and it goes through all what I call the 3 E's: the economy, energy, and the environment. We have to put all of them in one spot, and when we do, I think it provides us some really nice predictive power and explanatory power for where we are and where we're going. So the Crash Course gets you to there as well. We occupy pretty much the Google rankings on that for some reason. So you can find me there. We've got a YouTube presence, and my articles are routinely syndicated across other websites such as Zero Hedge or Dollar Collapse and Minionville, places like that.
All places that are on my financial survival toolkit, which people can get by going to CarrieLutz.com. Hey, it's been a pleasure having you on, Chris, and we'll look forward to future chats because I think we're going to have a lot to talk about sooner rather than later.
All right, excellent. Well, Carrie, have a wonderful 2012.
You too.